Our systems and metrics and analytics, as they've been used up to this point, have been very good at capturing the students in the front row waving their hands. What we're not as good at catching are the students in the back who might be a great fit, but they're not waving their hands in the same way.
If you're still trying to out-volume your enrollment problems, more apps, more emails, more FAFSAs, more outreach, you might be running the wrong playbook, or at least the old playbook. Today's episode is all about how we fix that. We're joined today by Jeff Baird, founder of Enroll ML and co-author of The Signal Solution, a new book that's quickly becoming essential reading for enrollment marketers and institutional leaders. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
And just so all the listeners know, Jeff's background is really rare. He's been a Fortune 50 executive, a college trustee, a cabinet officer during the pandemic. He has seen disruption from every angle, and now he's helping institutions rebuild their enrollment strategy using AI, behavioral data, and decision science. And on this episode, we're going to talk about how to identify the movable middle, those admitted students who are undecided but persuadable, why the application surge is misleading your marketing team, how to shift from a frantic spring yield push to a year-round system powered by real student signals, and how AI done right can help your team be more precise, efficient, and more human. Yes, it's going to be a lot. If you're sounding like that, it's really overwhelming. I'm a little overwhelmed by it too, but are these the most important topics? Absolutely. And this is all about preparing us for the most disrupted market higher ed has ever faced. All right, let's start with how we open the book. We open the book with a claim that higher ed is in a Category 5 collision. So we're talking hurricanes, right? Is this what we're talking about?
Yeah, catastrophic. Category 5 is the catastrophic, level of storm.
What are those forces behind the storm?
All of the forces are very well known and understood individually. As a matter of fact, when I talk about this, frequently I can sort of see people's recognition on each individual one. What makes our situation unique now is that we're in this collision, things we're all very familiar with. Obviously, the change in demographics, which, gets the majority of the press. The next one that we identified is really the combination of application surge and signal distortion. So, as we've spent the last decade or so sort of systematically de-frictioning the application process, right? In the spirit of equity and access, what we've done is distorted the signals that we've traditionally used.
And I think the same thing happened with FAFSA too, because while it's great that the FAFSA is much easier to use, the IRS retrieval tool has become easier, there's more people filing for FAFSA. So similar to those common applications skyrocketing, the number of people doing their applications, same thing with FAFSA. So both things mean something differently than they once did.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I've got some gray hair. When I applied to colleges, it was on a manual typewriter, and it was so difficult for me that I only applied to 5 schools. And what that meant from the institution side, though, was they knew, all 5 of those knew I was deadly serious. And obviously, that dynamic has changed. But that's the second major collision. The third is the increase in alternate pathways. Society views the pursuit of higher education differently than it did, just probably 10 or 15 years ago. The fourth is ROI and economics, right? Those pressures on us. And the fifth is one that we sort of named the TikTok effect, which really is the mandate for deeper personalization. And the reason that we called it the TikTok effect is because this generation and future generations are expecting that the algorithm understands them and that they're being listened to. So those 5 things individually we're all very much aware of, and they come up, in meetings and strategy discussions. But what is unique is all 5 of them colliding at the same time. And I would contend, by the way, if it were just 3, enrollment management and enrollment leaders have been pretty resilient over the last, 15, 20 years. If it was just 3 colliding, we probably work our way through. But I believe that all 5 colliding here is really unique. And that's why we called this the Category 5 storm.
Let's talk about the volume part first. You say that volume hides the truth. something very
Yeah.
close to that in the book. Tell me more about that. Why are those traditional metrics that we look at and we like to say, oh, we have more applications or we have more visit registrations, we have more than what is that doing to enrollment management now?
Well, let's start with volume without intent is what I kind of refer to as expensive noise.
Yeah.
And I saw this when I got into higher education about a decade ago and started working very closely with admissions teams. The amount of investment across higher education that traditionally has been spent at the top of the funnel is astronomical. It's in the close to $10 billion a year. We were successful in sort of generating that activity. But the problem now is, how do you manage it? How do you manage it when you have fewer staff and there's only 8 hours in the day? So when you couple this with the increase, what this category 5 storm drives, or what it mandates for institutions, which is the requirement for a deeper personalization with a smaller set of students that are on the fence. And so this is what I saw when I first came in and recognized this problem. This is where volume has kind of misled us for a while, a long time. The idea of if I can get more into the top, I will get more out of the bottom, worked, and it worked, and the strategies were built on that. And I'll tell you, I have a story with someone I've been working with recently with an institution that we were talking about their plan for next year. And they said, geez, we just need 5,000 more applications. And, my question was where in a world where they're shrinking students, and at what cost? Ultimately, it was all of these things that kind of led me to start looking more critically at what is happening in the middle of the funnel. And can we do a better job of identifying and connecting with those swing students that we refer to as the movable middle? But that was really the basis for what led to ultimately writing this book.
And you like to talk about how we can use behavioral signals versus those traditional metrics to help us understand and help us know what to do with individual students. So what are some of those signals that we need to be looking at versus the traditional enrollment metrics?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is actually what led to us building Enroll ML and building a platform that utilizes AI to get into these deeper signals. And fundamentally, the analytics that we have traditionally been using, by and large, work. There's a reason why we're using them, but we weren't and aren't or haven't been using the sort of regression-based analytics necessarily because they got us everything we were looking for. We used them because they were the best that we had. And it was really when we started digging deeper with machine learning that we started realizing or getting a clearer view that a signal is not the same for every student, or the same signal, I should say, does not mean the same thing for every student. And what it really is common sense. We just didn't have the computing power to get at this, which is it's the combination of behaviors and signals that differentiate you from me in terms of where we are in our intent journey. We both might have visited campus, but I might have visited because I was seriously considering, and you might have visited because your parents made you. Those are very different things. And so it was really the discovery, the ability to get to a lower level of individualization of what are each student's unique combination of their signals. And specifically, the breakthrough for us was in behavioral patterns. And behavioral patterns are not, did you submit your FAFSA? Did you apply early? Did you come on a visit? The behavioral patterns are things like that we've been able to identify, like how students engage and interact with the institution through crucial time windows. And what we found, again, with the power of AI and specifically machine learning in this portion, is that the patterns emerge and that there are very distinct patterns that can tell you whether students, even if they've taken all of the major traditional steps, we can see through the rest of their behaviors that they're either, actually not very interested or less interested than they may appear, or conversely, students who don't trigger our traditional big steps who are exceedingly interested. And we've got a bunch of stories like that where we're now able to identify those students on the fringes and on the edges. And that's really the big difference and breakthrough in what the technology has enabled us to do, is to move from grouping students, which again, directionally correct, but in a world where now enrollment is becoming incremental, how do we get the next point or two of yield? And a point or two of yield is one more student in 100. To get those incremental students, those are the ones that are traditional, analytics, and even with very big complex regression and profile-based models, we are missing the edges. That's what AI has unlocked, is the ability to catch those. And that's going to be, part of the key for institutions moving forward, is getting to those edge students.
Yeah, I think people can recognize the truth in this because we all know that every application isn't created equally. Not every application has that same intent. Not every application is going to yield the same way. It's individual students, and maybe sometimes it gets lost as we're looking at it as data points and groupings and CRM data. What are some of the behaviors that you can look at? Or what are we talking about? Are we talking about email clicks? Are we talking about website visits? What are these behaviors that help us understand the intent behind the student's action?
Yeah, well, there's sort of two different answers to this. I mean, the answer, when you can deploy a full-blown set of custom machine learning models, the answer is that there are hundreds and hundreds of simultaneous data points. Okay. So, and as a matter of course, in the software that we build, that's what's happening underneath the covers. We get asked this all the time: what are you tracking? And we have to sort of take a little breath, because it is hundreds of things. Now, what, short of deploying AI, into your admissions funnel to do this, the key thing, and this, I talk to people all the time about this, institutions and leaders and even cabinets, is it really is around trying to identify behavioral patterns. So not just a correlation of, if they did this, then enrollment rate is that. But can you find behavioral patterns, timings? We've been deploying AI in admissions for close to 4 or 5 years now. We've looked at hundreds of millions of rows of data, billions of rows of data. And what I can tell you definitively is no two institutions are the same. They are 100% different. But I'll give you an example of the types of things that we see. And this is one I've actually started to see a little more frequently, but it shows up in different places. And that is, for example, we're starting to see a pattern with how students are engaging with the institution in the 30 days immediately preceding when they hit submit on their application, coupled with the 30 days immediately after they hit submit. And so this is not just a matter of, how many times did they hit the website. This is the patterns of their communications, website being one of them, but with the admissions team and with, any outbound campaigns. But that's an example of trying to find those behavior patterns. And we've seen in several institutions, that's sort of a one that we aren't surprised when we see. And fundamentally, underneath all of this is what AI is unlocking, is just a level of consumer decision science that we just really haven't been tapped into. And it makes sense. Students who are highly interested react differently with the institution than ones who are not interested at all. But the critical, and this is really, for institutions moving forward, the objective is going to be to try as quickly and precisely as possible and as early as possible, get to the middle and identify the smaller set of students, particularly with, more and more applications coming in and the traditional signals being diluted. The ability to get in the middle to those students who, the metaphor I like to use is, our systems and metrics and analytics, as they've been used up to this point, have been very good at capturing the students in the front row waving their hands.
Yes. Yeah.
What we're not as good at catching are the students in the back who might be a great fit, but they're not waving their hands in the same way. And we've seen all sorts of examples of that happening, including identifying these underlying behavioral patterns that signaled very, very high affinity and proximity to a positive decision, yet the student had not taken the big steps. And as recently as this last cycle, I can think back on a couple of very specific examples of where those students were identified and the team called them up and they needed help getting their financial aid, forms over the goal line. They were embarrassed to ask for help and they would have been lost. They were not actively showing up on the focus lists.
What are some other examples of what enrollment teams and marketers can do with when they know this information? I love that example of, okay, something's going on. These students should have gotten their application for financial aid in, but they haven't. So that there's this example where we can reach out. What are some other ways? How is this helpful to the team?
Well, one of the things we talk about in the book, and I'm going to come back for a moment to looking at this through the lens of the student and how the students make decisions, or how, quite frankly, all of us make decisions, which is there's a very simplified framework for thinking about the decision process. And the oversimplification, we refer to it as OSO, objective, subjective, objective. And in the first objective phase, it is basic needs assessment, right? I am interested in nursing. Does this institution have nursing? Yes or no. The final objective phase is how do I complete my registration, right? How do I complete my financial aid and my housing? But the middle phase is the subjective phase. And that's where decisions become highly emotional. And the biggest miss that I've seen, over the last decade is not aligning, not understanding where students were in that cycle, and where they are in that cycle can be and often is different from where they show up in our stages. And so when you have that mismatch is when you miss that connection point. And so to answer your question, what I would offer is to try and figure out how to identify between behavioral patterns and how students react through your funnel, where they are, and then align that messaging and that outreach. If they haven't moved through the first objective phase, to try and communicate them, to just put them into an auto campaign that's trying to connect subjectively, you've missed them. Conversely, if they're in the subjective phase and they're still in, an automated campaign that's hitting either stage 3 objective elements, right, where you've pushed them too far, too fast, again, that's where signals cross. And so there really is an opportunity here to sort of think about the structures we put in place. And this is why we kind of talk about this as the new playbook, because it's got to get more personal, and we've got to make these connections that we've been missing on the edges. Again, by and large, it's been working up until this point.
I have to imagine that yield is in this subjective phase, this idea of yielding students and where they are in that process. And I like what you say, that yield shouldn't be a season, but a system. And I am a huge proponent of this myself, because I always say yield started the first second they ever knew about you. It doesn't just happen in the 2 months before May 1st.
Right.
So tell me a little bit more about your thoughts on yield season and how we have to think about that differently.
You've got it right. And I'm glad you caught that, because that really is, again, a mind shift for not everyone, but certainly some institutional playbooks. The objective here is to try and move a student through a journey to enrollment. And they've got to move through those phases. It's really interesting about those 3 phases, because, this is arguably one of the big 3 or 4 decisions in someone's life.
Yeah.
There's
not many, I think, that are so linked with your identity, right? Because where you go to college, who you marry, those are things that are about really personal to you and about your identity.
Your first house.
Yeah,
right.
Your first house. Where's your first house? What's it like? Yeah, Those types of things. So it's a very different consumer decision than a lot of people give it credit for.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why it requires a recognition of that. And when we talk about sort of yield being a season, it's this acknowledgement of that journey the student is moving through and trying to remain there with them. We have seen some extraordinary things in our AI work, including our AI models that we're looking at some automated campaigns that one of our partners was deploying. The model came up with something that was so mind-blowing that I had never even contemplated, there were a bunch of late yield cancels. And the cancels came after a campaign, an automated campaign that was sent out to check on the decision.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
We're all familiar with those.
That's right. We were, right? And the institution looked at that and thought it actually was like, this was really smart of us, right? We helped kind of clean out and figure out where we should focus. And I remember when I first deployed those, and I was in the same boat, like, this is really smart. But our AI actually came up with a different thesis and said, there's a whole bunch of these students, you might have caused this. They weren't ready. They weren't ready for that decision, and you forced it. And so instead of us celebrating that, look, we cleaned out some of the funnel and we can focus.
That's a very us thing, right?
Right. That's right. And
it was
so
helpful for us.
that's exactly right. And it actually wasn't helpful for us, as it turns out.
Yes.
But that's an example of thinking about yield as a system, not a season. At every step of the way through, rethinking campaigns, rethinking the triggers. And again, let's go back to, when were these built? By and large, right? What are the underlying structures that led to our automation, to our marketing automation? The simple, you still end up in the sort of same conclusion, which is, when we built these, it was by and large, it was a different time, just 3-4 years ago.
Yeah. And once you build it, you feel like you can't undo it.
Right.
You spent all that effort and all that time on the build of the automation. So it's really hard to back out of that mindset, I think.
Right. And the other element to this is not just yield as a season, but it really, there's the mandate now for the institution to be aligned around the same signal set. That's another piece that has been, sort of a little bit broken. The sometimes disconnect between the marketing team and strategies and initiatives and the enrollment team initiatives and academics and student support and the student, the faculty you're asking for help. We're in a world now where it's going to require a much tighter alignment across all of the stakeholders who, have a vested interest in enrollment.
Our listeners are very into AI. The AI topics when an episode has AI of a topic, some of the most listened to. I know, me personally, I am getting pitched AI tools multiple times a day. You all have been doing this for 4 to 5 years. You have, as you said, billions of lines of data behind this. Can you help us understand the difference between shiny AI new toys, shiny object over here, and smart AI use in enrollment?
Yes. And it's interesting. Several folks on our team, myself included, have been doing a fair amount of speaking recently, being asked to come in and talk about this very thing. And the way that I, kind of refer to the environment we're in now, which of course we're not even in the first inning. We haven't even gotten to the first inning of this yet, but it already feels like the grand finale of the fireworks show. It is chaos. It is lights. It is sound. It's noise. It's explosions everywhere.
The dogs are running and hiding behind under the bed.
Right. Here's how I would offer to sort of think about this. There's a couple of different, let's call them frameworks. The first is literally just placing the AI into kind of, let's call it 1 or 2, or let's say arguably 3 categories. One is it signal creating? Is it creating a new signal? The second is it processing a signal? And then the third, is it processing just its own signals, or is it processing all signals? And quite frankly, for us at EnrollML, my particular story with EnrollML is a little bit unique in that, Allison, I didn't design it and build it for you. I actually built it for me and used it with my own teams for 2 years. And what I wanted, which I didn't see the market providing, was something that would process all of the signals. My thesis was, to be able to create that deeper connection with a student, you had to have a complete picture. And the only way to create that complete picture was to be able to see everything. But in thinking about the AI, just those 3 groupings of, is this thing generating signal? What signals is it generating? And, some, many, all, nothing's really generating all, right? But is it processing signal? Is it processing just its own? Is it processing a subset? And then, this third category would be what's the degree to which it's processing and what does it do with those signals? But the second way to think about this, and this is, I can't stress this enough, which is there's a real risk for us because there's a lot of pressure. I know many leaders right now where the trustees have asked a very simple question, which is, what is your plan? What's your AI plan? And it's really complicated. And there's a risk of falling into a trap of vanity AI, which none of us need. And so the way to think about this is really around identifying for the particular tool you're looking at, essentially what specific processes is this automating or improving, and where are those processes in terms of criticality, in terms of driving enrollment. Applying AI to a set of processes that aren't really leaking. It's not going to move the needle. We've seen that, it's a risk now because of the fact that there's so much chaos. And so that's what I would offer to anyone kind of watching or listening to this is start small. We don't need to boil the ocean. Find very specific processes and that you should be able to answer this question. If I fix this thing, can I see direct line of sight between this and actually, improving our chances of growing enrollment?
That's all we have time for today, but there is a lot here. I have previewed the book. You've got to go actually get the book and read the entire book. But Jeff, thank you so much for coming on and giving us, really honestly, scratching the surface with us about the challenges we're seeing in enrollment and the ways that AI can help us.
Well, it's my pleasure. And we have important jobs. And if we can leverage technology to get back to them and turn back to be facing the students that need us, as opposed to facing the data screens, that's a win for everyone.
I think everyone's looking for that. So that's awesome. If today's episode gave you something to think about or something to try, share it with your team, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode of The Application.